think I have a wide range of heroes, and they are the most abstract bunch of people. Um, my mom, naturally, she's the first woman I knew intimately, and I heard her stories, her passion,
Mm.
saw her tears as much as I saw her triumphs, heard her prayers as much as I saw the anguish that she went through. So I could relate, I could understand because I was present in the moment when she experienced most of what she did.
Mm.
And then from reading history, I think some of the people that I've admired are people like the Egyptian pharaoh king, queen, Hatshepsut. She was just before Ramesses. She took over as a regent. She is the reason why a lot of the history of Egypt is as you see it, all that architecture, the richness of it, all that beauty. She was the pharaoh king and or the pharaoh queen, and I think just her legacy, hearing her story, and I think recently Egypt had a tribute to the pharaohs, and she was one of them. What's just sad about her history is that when the next pharaoh came in, which was Ramesses, I think the second, he tried to obliterate her. And
Mm.
but what came through was you cannot destroy legacy, you cannot destroy power that's innate. And
Mm.
when you're building, don't build looking at your gender or looking at the obstacles, but look at what you want to be and the final product you want to produce. History will tell its own story and you will be honored in your own way. Who else do I admire? I guess um, I looked at different women that have come into my life, the role they've played, the way they've influenced my thought processes. Um, it could be characters in a book, it could be individuals. I think Oprah, because she created a legacy in a space in a country that didn't really see Black women. And
Mm-hmm.
she created a voice for Black women and a legacy for Black women. It's different now because we all see ourselves as able to, because well, we're in a world where so many women have fought for us, as a gender and even as an ethnicity, and that in itself is a tribute to the fact that you need lone voices sometimes that are consistent and persistent in saying that anything and everything is possible. I believe in the power of the impossible in
Yes.
everything, in everything. I don't believe that there's anything that I cannot do. It may take time, persistence, consistency, but anything is possible and everything is possible. Um, the concept around dreaming big, I know people say it just to motivate, but you have to embody it, you have to live it. These women lived in a time where it wasn't the time for women empowerment like it is now, where everybody is talking about it as a buzzword, is something that we run with.
Mm.
Uh, Even my mom, she lived in a time where I think voting hadn't even started happening for women of color, for Black women. Being able to lead, being able to own a bank account or property, yet she went on and did all those things during that time.
Wow.
Uh, I think for me, growing up in a small town in Zimbabwe, didn't grow up in the rural background that most people come from, but then I grew up in a small town, and everybody who's ever lived in a small town knows that your whole world revolves around the ecosystem there. To be
Mm.
able to think bigger than the space that I was in, to move onto the global stage
Mm.
and hold my own,
Mm.
that in itself is the power of possibility. I did not limit myself because I saw women who were capable. I saw women who allowed themselves to have a voice, who did not wait to be invited to the table, but created their own tables. And they just went ahead and forged it, not to please anybody, not to tick any boxes, but because it resonated. And that's how I choose to live my life on a daily basis. Every choice that I make, every business that I set up, everything that I do, I create the world that I want to live in. And I'm very clear about that, and I'm very happy with those choices. My name is Tsitsi Mutendi. I used to be Tsitsi Sibenge, and I am a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a business person, in that order, because those are the things that are important to me, and the people that are important to me, and the work that's important to me. I changed the world. I am co-founder of African Family Firms, which is arguably the biggest African family business association on the African continent currently. I believe in the legacy of family businesses and the heritage that we can really sow into the future, especially the economic future of Africa. I believe in the African next gens, the education system. I invest in it through my venture in Mutendi Montessori, a Montessori-based primary school. I have invested in the publishing industry on the African continent through dance media. And I love telling African stories and curating a database of African voices. I find myself in different spaces where I feel that my voice and my ideas will make a difference, especially for the future. I truly believe that the life we live now is not a testimony to the experience we will have, but it is a testimony to the experience that our grandchildren will have, because they will live every decision we make today. We live the decisions of our grandparents, and that is the decisions around freedom, the decisions about voices and choices, and being able to be Black and be recognized in a space where when they lived, they weren't recognized, they weren't seen. What is it to me to be Black? No matter how many lifetimes I will be given, how many choices, no matter where in the timeline, I would still choose to be Black. I would still choose to be African, because I believe that we have such powerful stories, such resonance with the earth, resonance with history. We echo through time, through every timeline, every story that has ever been written in history. There's not a point in time you do not find our voices, you do not find our DNA, our identity, our push through. And we have always been. And I think for me, that's such a powerful testament to the fact that we have always been, we will always be. We are part of the echo of the universe. No matter how we are created, when we are created, to be Black is to be influential. To be Black is to tell a story. To be Black is to be part of the story. And to be Black is to be the example of tenacity, of strength, of vision, of possibility, of so many things that we are sometimes told we are not, because we, as a society, we tend to want to put down that we don't understand or that we believe may be more powerful than us, instead of embracing it, because once we embrace it, it just becomes bigger. Do you know what they say? I think the most interesting proverb that I think, or the most powerful proverb I've heard in the last few years, is that the story will always glorify the hunter until the lion learns to speak.
Correct. We know that. Right.
Yes.
Right.
So, as a lion, we need to learn to speak. We need to learn to share.
Mm-hmm.
We need to go beyond our oral history of passing on our family stories through. I think one of the most painful conversations I had was in the last month, where I was speaking to some people on my podcast, and they encourage people to write. And we were just discussing on how important it would be to capture the stories of family businesses, especially, essentially. And then I thought, the most painful thing about our histories is that if I think of myself, the story I know of my mom is the story she told me. Her story will end with me, or at most it will end with my child, whichever child that is, because I can only remember as far back as her mother, the story she told me of her mother, and even that is a bit hazy. I know just the facts that they weren't confirmed, but the facts that she knew that she was told. And then I asked her about her grandmother, and she just knows the facts as far as she was told. And none of us have a written first-hand account or story from any of these women or these men. And the pain in that is that you go to certain countries where you have people who have pictures that come from like the 1800s or whenever they started photography, and they have journals or books that were written. Yet we, up to now, when we have this much technology, we will do a lot of TikTok videos, but we won't document. We need to document. I need to tell my story, not for my children, but for my grandchildren and their children, so that they can hear it from me. They can watch these videos. They can hear firsthand how I felt, just like how we are impacted by our mothers, because we saw, we experienced, we felt. All these platforms that allow us now to tell our stories should be utilized by us, for us, through us, to solidify our stories, to make it something that we can hear, share, and tell. And what's important about even this discussion is that it's not for you, it's not for me, and it's not for the people who are going to watch it now, but it's for the people 100 years from now who want to know, who was I when I walked this space, and what did I think, why did I think it, and how will it help them? I think inclusion is a very important topic, especially in spaces where we're not a majority, but we are slowly becoming majority in certain places. Like I know there were some statistics that came out that said in the US, brown people and black people are becoming more of a majority than a minority. I think inclusion is when we no longer have to say Black History Month and it's just history throughout the year, and we are learning about the different people, regardless of skin color, who have contributed to the growth of our different countries and economies. And more so, I think where it is made of importance, especially in spaces in Europe and the US where they have to say Black history, it's a very big horn blow that says throughout the year we're not talking about Black people, we're not talking about their contribution. We kind of forget them. They're not in our history books, they're not part of our story. So we have to set aside a time where we have to remember what they've done. And considering the big impact of what Black people have done, no matter where they are as people, that is unfair, because without a doubt, Africa and Black people have contributed magnanimously to the world that we know. I mean, for a lot of the plantations to be successful, for a lot of the economies to be successful, they have taken from Africa, whether they've taken people or they have taken product or resources. It still has come from the motherland, which is Africa. Recognizing that is important. It's important not only for the Black people that live in our different countries, but it's important for every person to recognize the provenance of where things come from, why we need to be careful how we use resources, and also to bear the shame. Until we are able to bear the shame of some of the history that has happened as a human race, we'll never truly move on, and we'll never truly be able to live in an inclusive society, in an inclusive community, and we will continue to steal from each other. And when I say continue to steal from each other, I mean it's continuing not to acknowledge the contribution that is made by certain people of certain ethnicities. It's important. It's a discussion that just shouldn't even be had. It should just be natural to us to be able to acknowledge that a person made a contribution and look beyond their skin color. And then, if it's necessary in some cases where these people made a contribution during a time where their contribution wasn't allowed to be acknowledged, we should acknowledge that. Why did we go through a time where we did not allow certain people to have their contribution, no matter how big or small, acknowledged? Because all of these things will teach our future generations not to repeat the same mistakes. We won't ever be able to grow, we won't ever be able to be, if we don't acknowledge the influence and the impact of certain communities. And also because if we live in communities where we believe that we're the majority and we can ignore the minority, then we need to rethink our parameters, because we now live in a global community and we might be minorities in that global community. And if we are not willing to look back and say, we acknowledge some of the things that we overlooked, we acknowledge some of the things that we weren't, our ancestors, well, they made mistakes. We all make mistakes. And the beginning of healing comes from acknowledging that a wrong was made. And sometimes beyond what people may believe, where they believe certain ethnicities need you to pay in blood or in money, sometimes as human beings, we just need that verbal acknowledgement that I was wrong, I am sorry, and for it to be a meaningful apology. And from there, you start moving forward, because now you're moving together in a space where we know there's collaboration and there's true intent of recognition and inclusivity. I think, and the thing is, it's shame, which is something people don't talk about. In our Shona tradition or Shona culture, there's a proverb that says that shame will out trump or outdo death itself. So that translates to that when we are ashamed, we feel like it's all consuming. It dictates our lives, and it's more impactful to our lives than death itself. And one of the things that we've seen, especially when we've talked about things like slavery or colonialism, when people say, oh, can't you just get over it and move on from it? I think it's not necessarily they're wanting to say, let's move on from and get over it, but it's the shame of acknowledging that this is part of our history, and we were part of the people who caused so much pain, destruction, and agony for another group of people. And then you find that because the generations that didn't acknowledge it, because at that point they thought they were justified, they left it for the next generation and the next generation. And with every generation, because we are now more conscious of ourselves and conscious of the impact of our actions, the shame becomes a deeper seated shame, because we're thinking, how could this have happened? But then when it happened, we weren't alive. When it happened, the way we think now had not yet evolved. It is a process. And so we need to take ownership of the shame. We need to take ownership of, this truly did happen. My ancestors were part of this. And this is across the board. It's not only a certain group of people. I mean, slavery happened because there were other Black people who allowed it to happen. So there is also that shame that we carry as Black people, that we sold each other. It was not necessary. It never needed to happen. Have we acknowledged that? Have we acknowledged the fact that it was never meant to happen? Have we all carried the burden of our shame and acknowledged that, you know what, it is shameful, we are sorry, It should never happen again. And these are the ways that we're going to take steps to ensure that this never happens again. Addressing the fact that we want to start afresh, and then asking the questions around, as we live now in a world where we want to be inclusive of everybody, are we truly being inclusive? And what does it mean to be inclusive? And that is across the board. It's not just a race issue, it's a gender issue.
100%.
We even have colorism within our own Black communities. We have body shaming. All these things that we face are simply because we do not allow ourselves to acknowledge that we are different. We run scared when we see things that are different from what we know, different from what we recognize. We want conformity in the human psyche. You find even when the psychology books that teach you to help raise children, where they say children like patterns. Patterns give them comfort. They give them a sense of knowing what is going to happen next. As human beings, we naturally, psychologically, like patterns. We like knowing what's going to happen next. So you can imagine if you get into a situation where all of a sudden everything that you thought should happen in a certain way is now happening differently. That pushback against change. Change is one of the biggest things that we push back against. And every day there are changes that we have to embrace. Are we all embracing change? Are we all embracing it at the same moment, at the same time? Are we acknowledging the struggles of the different people within our groupings, within our psyche? Or are we just saying, well, they got to be strong, they've got to move on? I think vantage point as well as perception is very, very important, and understanding the group mentality. The herd mentality is a very, very powerful thing. We sometimes do things because other people are doing them without asking ourselves, is it necessary? Is it right? Should I participate? And sometimes we find ourselves in positions where we say nothing because we are afraid for our own lives and the lives of our loved ones. Slavery in itself should not just be unpacked from a space where people just believe that people walked in and took people and left. There has to be so many different stories that were never told because there was never the opportunities to tell these stories. And because there was never the opportunity and we'll never truly hear what happened, we are not in a space or a place to ever judge, but to acknowledge the fact that what happened tore apart families, it tore apart nations, it created a thought process that was wrong for many people. Goes back to those that issue I was talking about of difference, whereas in we push against everything we feel is different, and we cannot discount the fact that if you have never traveled in your life and then you end up on the shores of a distant country and you see somebody who's a completely different person, different hair, different skin color, different dressing, different everything, when your assumption was that the world is all the same, that in itself can be impactful psychologically, and your reaction to it may or may not be right. And it also then looks at the African people. We have always been a people that is welcoming, that is accepting, because when we saw these strangers land on our shores, we allowed them into our homes, into our communities. And then bad things happened. Both sides of the story are there, but we have no recollection, we have no authentication, we have a perception from one side of the story, and one side all the same, whether it's empathetic, sympathetic, or is judgmental, it's still one side. And it's so important for us now to start telling the story from where we are. How do we handle how we feel now? How do we handle how we are treated now? How do make people accountable? At the same time, how do we collaborate? Because we are all the same. We are all on the same blue marble that is floating around in a universe that we know nothing about. And we are all humans. At the end of the day, how we treat each other, how we treat the planet is going to come back to us. As we have seen year on year growth of people, year on year growth and destruction of the planet, it all falls on us as human beings. And more so for us as Black people, we need to be more conscious of the fact that we have seen what bias and destruction can be like. We have seen how much pain it can cause, and we have seen how much destruction it can cause. We're not saying, oh, I'm not saying let's sugarcoat it and let bygones be bygones. No, I'm saying, you know what? Sometimes you just need to accept the fact that this has happened, and where do we go from this moment? And when something that does not help us, or that causes more fracture to an already damaged bone, we need to bring light to it and say, this is wrong, you cannot continue doing this. This is biased, you cannot continue doing this. And all the movements around the world that speak against anything that is biased, anything that is focused towards disadvantaging any communities, they have to continue doing the work that they're doing. It's important because the world is big. As much as the internet has made it small, if we continue making noise and we continue raising people who come to support that noise, the noise will get bigger and people will realize that change has to happen. And until we can effect change in a way that we see that we are all treated equally, or there is equity in the way that we are treated, we can't stop, and neither can we ever drown out our voices. It is our right to ensure that we tell our stories, and it is a privilege that we must use on a daily basis.